London remembered scandals, but Constantinople created them. In 1853, a single rumor inside the British embassy could end a man's career before the truth ever had a chance to exist. Not because of what could be proven, but because of what powerful people decided to believe. And once they decided, nothing could undo it. Ambassador Richard Whitmore understood this better than anyone. That was why he spent his life controlling information, managing perception, and eliminating risk before it had a name. What he did not understand was that the one threat capable of destroying him would never come from a rival empire. It would begin inside his own home. Richard Whitmore arrived in the Ottoman Empire as a man built for control, trusted by London, respected by allies, feared just enough by rivals to remain effective. He did not raise his voice. He did not react impulsively. He did not allow weakness to exist where it could be observed. And he believed that discipline extended to everything around him, including his marriage. Lady Eleanor Whitmore had always been described as perfect, not passionate, not unpredictable, perfect. The kind of woman who fit into rooms designed by men and never disturbed their balance. In London, she was admired for it. In Constantinople, she disappeared inside it. At embassy dinners, she sat beside her husband while conversations moved around her like water around stone. Military strategy, trade routes, political leverage, future conflicts disguised as cooperation. Men spoke, decided, negotiated, and reshaped nations while she existed beside them, without ever entering the conversation. No one asked what she thought. Richard never noticed that silence slowly became absence. The city changed her before he understood she was changing at all. Constantinople did not reward restraint. It exposed it. It filled empty space with sound, movement, attention. And when attention finally found Eleanor, it did not come from her husband. It came from Kamal Aden, young, precise, educated in Paris, fluent in English, French, and Turkish. But language was not his real advantage. He understood what people meant before they said it. He heard what was hidden between words. Their first real exchange was almost invisible. "You are present in every room," he said once quietly, while Richard debated naval positions with an Ottoman minister. "But no one is actually speaking to you." Eleanor should have dismissed him. Instead, she felt something shift. Not attraction, recognition. After that, the changes were small enough to deny. She remained at gatherings longer than before, asked questions she once ignored, watched conversations instead of simply sitting through them. Once, in the embassy garden, she laughed softly, and a servant later whispered that it sounded unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. Richard called it adjustment. The city called it exposure. Then came the first rumor. A carriage seen near the Bosphorus after midnight. A veiled woman stepping into shadow. A man waiting where no British diplomat should be. No one said her name. They did not need to. Because in places where power exists, truth is rarely spoken directly. It is observed, then shared, then believed. Richard remained untouched by it until the night he returned early. The embassy felt wrong the moment he entered. No music from the drawing room, no movement in the corridors, no Eleanor. Silence, but not the peaceful kind. The kind that exists when something is being hidden. Then footsteps. Upstairs. Measured. Male. Richard stopped at the base of the staircase as something inside him tightened with quiet certainty. Not confusion, recognition. Then Eleanor's voice, soft, urgent. Not afraid of the man inside the room, afraid of being heard. And in that moment, before he moved, before he opened the door, before suspicion became proof, Richard Whitmore understood something he had never allowed himself to consider. Control does not fail suddenly. It disappears slowly, while you are focused on everything except what is already slipping away. And by the time you notice it, there is nothing left to save. Richard climbed the stairs slowly. Not because he needed time to reach the door, because some part of him needed time to avoid it. Each step gave him one more chance to replace what he already knew with something easier to accept. A servant moving furniture, a visitor who had arrived without notice, a misunderstanding large enough to survive if he chose not to examine it too closely. That was how men like him protected their lives. Not by avoiding truth, by delaying it until it could no longer destroy them. But his body was already ahead of his thoughts. At the top of the staircase, he stopped. Inside the room, something moved quickly. Fabric, breath, a chair scraping across the floor. Then silence. Not natural silence. Controlled silence. The kind that exists when two people are trying to erase a moment that has already happened. Richard opened the door. Kamal Aden stood near the window, his composure almost intact, which made everything worse. Eleanor stood across the room, one hand pressed against her throat as if she could physically force time backward. For several seconds, no one moved. The world outside continued without interruption. Rain struck the windows with steady rhythm. Carriages passed below. Voices drifted faintly from the street. Inside, something ended without sound. Richard looked at Kamal first. Not at Eleanor. That choice defined everything that followed. Kamal did not run. He did not speak. He simply stood there, aware of what had been exposed, but not ashamed enough to disappear. That made Richard feel something far more violent than anger. Respect. And he hated himself for it. Eleanor tried to speak. "Richard, please." He raised his hand. She stopped immediately. That silence between them carried years of habit. Years of her adjusting to him. Years of him never needing to notice. Richard stepped further into the room and closed the door behind him. How long? No accusation, no raised voice. No. Just a question that already understood the answer would be worse than anything he had imagined. Eleanor hesitated. That was enough. How long? Her voice barely held. Since November. 4 months. 4 months of shared meals, of quiet evenings, of conversations that now felt constructed rather than real, of presence that meant nothing. Richard felt something tighten in his chest, not sharply, slowly, as if something inside him had begun closing, one layer at a time. Breathing did not stop, but it changed. Less air, more control. Each breath measured, deliberate, as though if he allowed even one to break, everything would collapse with it. He remained standing. That was the only thing he could still control. He turned to Kamal. "Leave." Kamal did not move immediately. He looked at Eleanor. That single movement destroyed the last piece of stability Richard had left. "Do not look at her." His voice did not rise, but something beneath it shifted. Something final. Kamal held his ground for a second longer, then moved toward the door. Before leaving, he spoke quietly. "She was alone long before I came." The door closed. The room felt smaller. Eleanor began to cry, but it was not the kind of crying that asks for forgiveness. It was the kind that protects something that cannot be undone. Richard looked at her. For the first time, he did not see his wife. He saw someone who had been living beside him for months without him ever truly seeing her at all. "You love him." She did not answer. Her silence was not confusion. It was truth. Something inside Richard's chest tightened further. Breathing became shallower, controlled, as if something invisible was pressing inward, slowly, without urgency, but without stopping. He understood then that this was not a mistake, not an accident. Not something that could be corrected by authority, distance, or time. This had been growing, quietly, while he was present, while he was watching everything else, except the one thing that mattered. And now it was too late. Because by the time truth becomes visible, it has already been real for far longer than you are willing to admit. The scandal did not explode. It spread. That made it more dangerous. In London, a betrayal could be contained, framed, softened into something respectable enough to survive. In Constantinople, it moved differently. It passed through people, through rooms, through conversations that never mentioned names, yet somehow carried exact meaning. Within days, the city adjusted around the truth. Richard felt it immediately. Men who once spoke directly now chose their words more carefully. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Others held it a second too long. Both reactions meant the same thing. They knew. At diplomatic dinners, nothing changed on the surface. Wine was poured. Agreements were discussed. Alliances were measured in careful sentences. But beneath every exchange, there was something else. Observation. Calculation. Richard was no longer just an ambassador. He was a variable. French diplomats began referencing loyalty in ways that sounded accidental but never were. Russian officials smiled too comfortably during negotiations that had nothing to do with personal matters. Ottoman ministers became more precise, more cautious, as if they were now negotiating not just with a representative of Britain, but with a man whose position could be weakened. Richard understood exactly what that meant. Information had shifted, and once information shifts, power follows. He tried to contain it. He reduced Eleanor's appearances, limited her movements, canceled invitations, dismissed 2 servants whose silence he no longer trusted. He structured their lives the way he structured diplomacy: controlled, restricted, predictable. But Eleanor did not behave like something that could be managed. When he told her she would return to England within the month, she said no. Not loudly, not emotionally, simply no. That refusal changed something fundamental between them. "You do not understand what this will cost," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I understand exactly what it has already cost." The words did not strike. They settled. He had no immediate answer, because for the first time the situation was not something he could solve by being more precise, more controlled, more correct. Then came the letter, anonymous, delivered directly into the embassy without error. That alone meant something. It meant access. It meant intention. It meant someone wanted him to know. He opened it alone. One sentence. "Ask your wife what happened in the palace garden 3 months ago." Richard read it twice, then again. The simplicity of it made it worse. That evening, he confronted her. At first, she tried to hold the version of reality that could still survive. She answered carefully, avoided specifics, kept her voice steady. Then he said, "Palace garden." Her expression changed. Instantly. "That was enough. Were you with him there?" She closed her eyes. That was confirmation. Something inside Richard shifted again, deeper, colder, not anger. Not humiliation, clarity. If they had met near the palace, then others could have seen them. Guards, officials, servants loyal to ministers, men whose entire purpose was to observe and remember. The affair was no longer private. It had moved into spaces where power existed, and once something touches power, it stops being personal. It becomes leverage, something that can be used, reshaped, turned, destroyed, depending on who holds it. Richard understood that better than anyone, which meant he understood something else. He was no longer dealing with betrayal. He was standing inside a situation that could be used against him at any moment, and he had no way to control it. "Do you understand what you have done?" She looked at him. For the first time, there was no apology in her expression. "You stopped seeing me long before this happened." The words were quiet. That made them heavier. "You replaced me with your work." Richard felt something sharp in that sentence. Because it was not entirely wrong. He had not abandoned her, but he had reduced her to presence, to stability, to something that existed without needing attention. Then she said the one thing that ended everything. "With him, I did not feel invisible." That was it. No dramatic confession, no justification, no attempt to soften it. Absence, filled by someone else. Richard stepped back slightly. In that moment, he understood something he had been avoiding. He was not trying to save a marriage. He was standing in the remains of something that had already ended. Quietly, gradually, without conflict, until there was nothing left to repair, only something left to expose. And once something is exposed, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to everyone who can use it. The reception at the Ottoman Palace was not an event. It was a stage. Everyone arrived already knowing something would happen. They just did not know who would be forced to carry it. Richard understood that before he stepped inside. That was why Eleanor walked beside him. Not because it was natural, because it was necessary. If he appeared alone, it confirmed weakness. If she stayed hidden, it confirmed guilt. So they entered together. Perfect, controlled, already broken. The palace was filled beyond comfort. British officials, Ottoman ministers, French officers, merchants, observers who had no official role but always appeared when something important was about to unfold. Music played, voices moved, but attention was not on diplomacy. It was on them. Kamal entered later with the Ottoman delegation. He did not look at Eleanor. That restraint made everything worse. Because everyone else did. The room watched without appearing to watch. That was how power worked. Silently, patiently. Waiting. Richard moved through conversations with precision. Every word measured. Every pause is intentional. He spoke of alliances, naval positioning, trade stability, as if nothing had shifted. His voice did not change. His posture did not break. But inside, something had already gone still. Not calm, not control. Absence. Then it happened. A French diplomat, drunk enough to forget consequences, raised his glass higher than necessary and smiled too widely. To Britain and the Ottoman Empire. A pause. Not long, just enough. Then the strike. May their relationships remain close. The room stopped, not completely, but enough. Enough for attention to lock into place. Enough for silence to become shared. Every glance moved at once, toward Eleanor, toward Kamal, toward Richard. That was the moment everything shifted. Private betrayal became public fact. Richard felt it immediately, not as shock, as weight. The kind that settles over a room when something irreversible has just been said out loud. This was where men collapsed, where control failed, where reputation ended in a single reaction. Richard smiled, not naturally, not comfortably, precisely. He lifted his glass. Empires do not collapse because of rumors. His voice carried without force. They collapse when men mistake gossip for power. Silence deepened. Then he turned slightly toward the French diplomat. If we are to discuss weakness tonight, let us begin with those who rely on it. No one laughed, no one moved. The control was complete, absolute. From the outside, he had won. The room shifted back into motion. Conversations resumed. Music continued. Glasses were raised again. But something had changed permanently. Because what he had protected was not dignity. It was appearance. And those are not the same thing. Eleanor stood beside him. Still, composed, untouched on the surface, but he did not look at her. Not once. Because looking at her would mean acknowledging something he could not allow himself to feel in that room. Kamal remained where he stood, contained, separated, removed without being dismissed. That was how power handled problems it could not openly address. It did not destroy them. It isolated them. The reception continued, but nothing that followed mattered. By morning, London knew, not the full truth, something worse, a version. A story shaped just enough to spread. By afternoon, it had reached Parliament. By evening, it had already begun to define him. And once a narrative defines you, it does not need to be accurate. Inside the embassy, Eleanor packed. Richard stood in the doorway and watched. She folded dresses carefully as if order still mattered, as if precision could undo consequence. At one point, she stopped. "Do you hate me now?" He looked at her, long enough to understand that the answer would change nothing. No. The word landed without force, and that made it heavier. Because hatred would have meant something still existed. Emotion, reaction, connection. This was different. This was absence. And absence cannot be repaired. Richard stepped back from the doorway. "I will arrange your return to England." She nodded once. No resistance, no argument. That was the final shift. Then she asked quietly, "Will you destroy him?" Richard did not ask who she meant. He already knew. And that was the last confirmation he needed. No. His voice remained steady. "You already did." That was not anger, not revenge, not even judgment. Just truth spoken without protection. And once truth is spoken like that, there is nothing left to negotiate. Eleanor returned to England before summer. No one welcomed her back. Not openly. Not directly. But in London, rejection was never loud. It did not need to be. It lived in small, precise absences, invitations that never arrived, conversations that ended a second too early, familiar faces that turned into polite strangers the moment she entered a room. She was not treated as a woman who had made a mistake. She was treated as a woman who had made something visible. That made her dangerous. At dinners, her name appeared only in lowered voices. Not with outrage, but with discomfort, carefully disguised as dignity. Because what she had done was not rare, only exposed. And exposure is what society punishes. Men who had spent years quietly betraying their wives now spoke about honor. Women who had learned to survive emotional absence now spoke about loyalty. Everyone adjusted their words just enough to place distance between themselves and her. Eleanor understood quickly. She had not broken a rule. She had broken an illusion. Kemal remained in Constantinople, but not as he had been before. No public disgrace followed him. That would have required acknowledgement. Instead, his removal was exact. He was reassigned, redirected, moved away from influence without explanation. Meetings continued without him. Decisions formed without him. Doors that once opened without hesitation now required justification. Power had not punished him. It had excluded him. And exclusion is slower, but final. He continued writing to Eleanor. At first, the letters came regularly, controlled, careful, never reckless enough to create new danger. He wrote about ordinary things, but beneath them lived something neither of them could fully name without destroying it. Mornings near the Bosphorus, conversations left unfinished, silence that no longer felt the same without her inside it. Eleanor read every letter, more than once, always alone, but she did not answer all of them. That was the part no one saw. The affair had been emotional. The aftermath was not. She understood something he did not. There was no version of their story that survived outside of secrecy. Not in England, not in Constantinople, not anywhere power had rules. Months passed. Then one day, the letters stopped. No explanation, no final message, no attempt to preserve what had already been lost. Just silence. Eleanor waited longer than she should have. Then she understood. Not emotionally, logically. He had chosen survival. The same way Richard always had. The same way she had not. Richard returned to England months later. Quieter, sharper, changed in ways people described as strength, because they did not know how else to name it. He moved through society without difficulty. That was the difference. Men recovered from scandal faster, especially when they remained useful. People spoke to him again, invited him again, trusted him again. But something fundamental had changed. Not in how he was seen, in how he saw. He no longer assumed loyalty. He no longer mistook silence for stability. He no longer believed that control protected anything that mattered. They met once, years later. Not planned, not avoided. At a private funeral where neither of them expected the other to be. For a moment, they stood beside each other as if nothing had ever happened, which made everything that had happened feel even more present. Eleanor looked at him. Did it ever stop hurting? Richard did not answer immediately. He looked ahead, not at her. No, that was all. No explanation, no attempt to soften it. Just truth without protection. Eleanor nodded. That answer did not give her peace. It gave her clarity. Because she understood then that the pain had not been temporary. It had become structure. Something that did not leave. Something that simply became part of who they were. They did not speak again. They did not need to. Because everything that could have been said had already been lived. Years later, people remembered the scandal differently. Some called it a mistake. Some called it weakness. Some called it inevitable. All of them were wrong. Because the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. This was never just betrayal. It was what happens when someone spends years being invisible, and then for a moment is finally seen. Not as a role, not as a name, not as something convenient, but as a person. And by the time they understand what that moment really costs, they have already lost everything that once made their life safe.